He's an Ableton certified trainer and releases tools and devices on his site, ELPHNT. He's here to talk about his new album, Microcosmos, and some of the workflow and techniques behind it. Please welcome Thomas Glendinning back to the Music Production Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Baby Audio, and I want to show you their new exciting vocal plugin called Humanoid. I've got a little vocal here, and this is what it sounds on its own. But it's something I can never do. Lyrics inspired by Terminator 2, it seemed appropriate. And now I'm going to turn on Humanoid. But there's nothing wrong with you. And this is about as tame as Humanoid gets. We'll bring back in the music. And I'm going to quantize the vocals a little more. We can robotify it even further, and we can play with the formants. It's when it hurts, but there's nothing wrong with you. Lots of versatility here with just these few controls. And then the next section allows us to add in some synthesis. So there's a wavetable synthesizer that combines with your voice, and you can choose different waveforms and experiment with those forms as much as you like. And of course, you could always automate this stuff for fun. You can add in a higher octave or a lower octave. Filter this down a bit and even add some fun effects, a widen and a warble. There's a freeze, which is really cool. So just engage that, and then there's a buffer you can play with. Very versatile plugin here for getting those extreme vocal effects. I know why you cry. Now you might think of autotune as being subtle to extreme effects. Humanoid starts at extreme and goes way beyond that, which is why it's so fun. And a really cool feature is you can use MIDI from your MIDI controller to trigger the notes inside of Humanoid. So I'm going to switch on the MIDI switch here. I've got push, and I'm going to play this again. And we're going to be able to hear what we can do with our MIDI controller, which is pretty cool. I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do. And by playing the pads on my keyboard, it's when it hurts, I can make my own new melodies. With you. I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do. So you can re-synthesize your parts like you would on a vocoder. I'm going to go back to the scale mode. I know why you cry. So this is Humanoid. I'm just scratching the surface playing around with it here and having a lot of fun. It's a really cool extreme vocal plugin that takes your vocals to all kinds of cool futuristic levels. So check it out. Go to babyaudio.io. That's babyaud.io and check out Humanoid. Use the code MPP15 to save 15% off. The plugin is currently discounted, so this code will get you an extra 15% off. It's a great time to check it out. Humanoid is a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it, and I think you will too. Go to babyaud.io and use the code MPP15 to save 15%. Welcome back, Tom. Great to have you.
Yes, good to be here. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, you are a 3-time guest at this point now. So
3-time, really?
You're an elite club.
I thought this was my 2nd time. And maybe
nope.
I'm forgetting.
I checked before we started.
Forgetting one of those times. Damn, it's been a while, obviously.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I think it was like I could tell you what episode it was. We did number 26. So you were right in the early days, one of the first guests. And then 158.
Wow. And what number is this then?
This will be somewhere around 370 something, 380 maybe.
Dude, that's amazing. Congrats on keeping it going for so long.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, it's, getting to talk to people like you, you know, it's a great excuse. I think like everyone should just start a podcast so they can find interesting people to talk to and tell them it's a podcast.
Never release it. Don't tell them it's never being released. Just chat to
Yeah, whatever you
people.
want.
Yeah.
I mean, that is really basically what I did. So
Nice. Love it.
yeah. But it's good to have you back. You've got some new stuff out. You've released a lot of stuff since we've last talked, but most recently you've got the Essentials pack, Max for Live pack. So for people listening, they should know that you're a Max for Live crafts person. You've got so many cool stuff, a lot of other stuff besides Max for Live too. But I think one of the things I love about what you do is the design, the overall look. You got it dialed in almost like right from the beginning, which coming from someone like me that I feel like I can't ever decide on anything and there's no continuity to the stuff I do. I always appreciate that. And the look of your stuff is slick and clean, simple, but very informative. And you can just look at it and know. And your Essentials pack is a great example of that, in that there are these 5 devices that are just doing one job, which so many of the things we have are like these giant spaceships that complicated, so many things interacting. It's nice to have something that just does something well. And that's it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole idea behind the pack was exactly that. There's so many things in live where it is this like big kind of complicated effect that it can be useful to have all that in one thing, but oftentimes I find I'm like turning a whole bunch of stuff off just to use like one thing. Yeah. It's like a really good example of that would be the shift device in the Essentials pack, because Ableton's got it's called Shifter. It used to be Frequency Shifter, and then they updated it. It's just Shifter. And basically all I ever use that device for, you can do some cool stuff with it, but all I ever use it for is for tuning drums. Like literally just load it up, put it on the frequency shift, and then I'm just like dialing 1 or 2 controls. But that device has like got LFOs in it and all kinds of other stuff in it. And I was like, well, I just only ever use these 1 or 2 things. I don't have to look at all this other junk when I'm just tuning my drums. So I was like, oh, I'll just make a little Max device that does that. It just does the one thing that I want it to do. And then I think that may have actually been one of the first devices in the pack that then kind of led to all these other these other devices that do very similar things, in that they're probably like, if I think about it, kind of all the devices in the pack, sort of save for one, Ableton can already do everything that they do in various different ways, but they are just like really simplified versions of things that I was using a lot anyway, minus all the junk I didn't need.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of with you actually with the shifter, which I keep wanting to call frequency shifter still. I always use it for, I always used it for like just a warble effect, kind of like a tape, because you can program a really slow pitch movement. And then sometimes I would just string together like 3 of them, and they're just all kind of wiggling a little bit. So it sounds like you've got a like lousy cassette tape or something.
Yep.
But yeah, a lot of the other stuff is like, I don't really need it too much. Ring modulator.
Well, maybe that's the next update to the Essentials pack, is the Brian Funk tape warble module, where it's just one dial that does all that behind the scenes.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Well, they've kind of done that a little bit with chorus ensemble. Like it's just got the vibrato that you can sort of use in that way. But I think it'd be cool to have one that was less predictable.
Yeah, because the vibrato mode in the chorus ensemble it's just like a fixed kind of sine wave modulation.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can change the modulation, but it's just going to be at a fixed rate. So I should be taking some notes here, because it would be a really cool little just device that does that. It's just kind of warbling the pitch a bit, but maybe has some randomization in it, or you can have different waves that blend for fast and slow. I think. I would love it. Well, that's speaking of the Essentials pack, that's kind of has been my idea with the Essentials pack, is that there are these 5 initial devices that I made, but there's going to be more. I've already got, I think there was kind of 3 ideas for new devices I want to add. Now I've got a 4th one, the tape warble.
Cool.
And so hopefully it's going to be a pack that will just kind of grow over time. but with this sort of same kind of concept of these really simple kind of 1 or 2 knob devices.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's smart, and it's also just really practical. Sometimes you just want that thing. Let's go. Let's move on. And rather than dialing it all in and all that, it's definitely cool.
Exactly.
You've got a cool framework for it too, for people downloading it. Pay if you can, which I haven't heard that before. I've heard pay what you want, pay, optional or whatever. But how does that work for you, do you think? Do you think that is... I always wonder about that with my own packs, right? Like, what if I just made it this or made it that, or the psychology of selling stuff.
So I guess there's kind of an interesting, but also maybe not so interesting story behind why I went that route. Is the long version of the story is I used to use Gumroad as my store, which anybody listening, I'm sure if you're into music tech, you've definitely come across Gumroad at some point.
Yeah, that's what I use. I love it.
Something or other. And they have now I can't remember what it is. It's pay what you want is their model, where the kind of buyer just can set that you can set a recommended price, and then the buyer can set however much they want to pay. And it's really easy to do that in kind of Gumroad. But then fast forward a couple of years, and I moved over to WordPress and WooCommerce for my store, which has been on the whole really, really great. And I've been happy with the move. But what happens with WooCommerce is to add kind of extra functionality to your store, you usually have to buy some kind of extension. And so there is a pay what you want extension for WooCommerce, but you got to pay for it yearly. It's really not a lot. It's like $50 a year kind of thing. But it's just this extra thing that you sort of had to add to WooCommerce. And so when I was thinking about, I want to make this pack, I wanted to make the pack kind of fairly accessible to people, but also sort of still maybe get some money from it. I was like, oh, well, how can I do that, but not have to go through all this extra hassle of like installing this WooCommerce plugin? And I was like, well, what if I just did this pay if you can thing, where it's like, it's kind of free, it's kind of paid. It's basically, I guess the way I think about it is like, it is a paid pack, and I've sort of priced it at what I think it would be worth if it was a paid pack, but there's this little option for, you can just download it for free. A really good example of this, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but one of my favorite plugin companies is this company called Freak Show Industries. And they have this option called Steal This Plugin. So they sell all their plugins. They're actually great. Their whole vibe, it kind of leans into their vibe. They've got this weird kind of dystopian graphic design, kind of cool, anarchic, crazy sort of, the effects are super fun. But yeah, they have this, so on their like product pages, it's like a regular plugin product page where you can pay whatever, and there's a little button below that says, do you want to steal this plugin? And it essentially lets you download the plugin for free, but kind of guilt trips you into feeling like you're stealing the plugin, which is great. So it's kind of something along those lines, where it's like, actually, this is how much I think it's worth. But if you want to support, pay for it. If you can't afford it right now, if you want to come back and support it later, then just hit the download for free button and away you go.
That's cool. So, I like that. And that's a funny thing. Steal this plugin.
It's great.
A little bit of guilt, but maybe also the rebel inside you gets to be fulfilled without any consequences.
It is cool though, because I've gone back. I haven't ended up using all their plugins, but there's one that I use quite a lot, and I've gone back and ended up paying for that one, which I generally try to do anyway with anything that I get for free, if I can support the creator in some way. So you do kind of, I'm sure not everyone does, but you do kind of almost feel compelled if you end up using it to go back, and it's kind of like an infinite free trial, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I'm like the same as you. I mean, I want everything I'm doing to be accessible. Like, it's not going to break your bank or something. And I'm usually, so if people reach out, which they have in the past, I'll usually just say, yeah, here you go. Like, you can have it. Like, I don't want, it's not like we're trying to get rich off of, hopeful producers, but it's time and work too. So that's a cool way to go about it.
Yeah. And I mean, to report back on the success of my experiment, my pay if you can experiment, it was very surprising to me, because it kind of did about the same numbers as I would have normally done if I'd made it a paid pack. So I'm happy to report that people are willing to pay for things and support if you kind of ask them to, which is really good to hear. And obviously really happy that there was so many people that were willing to kind of pay for it. What was great about it though is I probably got way more downloads than I would have gotten if I'd made it a paid pack, but ended up sort of selling about the same as I kind of normally do. So it sort of almost worked exactly the way I'd hoped, is that more people got access to it, but I was still kind of able to kind of recoup for my time for working on stuff. So it may be a model I just continue to use.
That's cool. I find similar stuff with the free packs that I put out. They obviously get more reach than stuff that are paid for, but you can add money in there on the, when you do the Gumroad thing, you could either put the 0 in or you can add whatever. And sometimes the free ones wind up making more than some of the for sale ones. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
It's always a funny, after I finish something anyway, I'm like, okay, let's see if anyone wants this, anyone likes this. And sometimes you're really surprised at what works, and some of the things that don't work, you're like, I don't get it. Like, this is so cool.
Well, in a way, it's kind of actually how I got started down this road, because I'm sure we've spoken about this on previous podcasts, but the sort of way that ELPHNT kind of came about and the way that it is now is I was just making stuff for myself. And I was like, oh, this stuff is kind of useful. Maybe other people will find it useful. Put it up on Gumroad for free with the pay what you want thing. Just thinking like, oh, it's just out there. Maybe some people download it. And then people ended up paying for it. And I was like, oh, hey, this is kind of cool. Maybe I could actually do this as the thing that I do for a living kind of thing. And one thing led to another. And here I am today. So the pay what you want is it's my superhero origin story.
Nice. That's a good one. It's like noble and proper good. It's not like some evil thing that happened that turned you into a villain.
Yeah.
And you've also got the new album, which I think you're one to kind of play around with letters and language. So I'm assuming you call it Conso, the artist name. Yeah. But the L is like a / and then it's called Microcosms.
Microcosmos.
Cosmos. I wrote that too. Microcosmos. Okay, fun. But the C's are brackets. They're like parentheses.
Yeah. So there's I guess there's two stories in each of those names. The first is I don't know why I do this to myself, but I do love choosing like kind of complex names that then give me all kinds of problems down the line, because it's harder to Google or whatever it happens to be, or as was kind of aware of when I went into it, but now have realized is more of a problem than I thought it was going to be, is obviously a / is kind of a reserved character in a lot of like file systems and things. So when I'm trying to name files with the / in it, it's sometimes some platforms like it, some platforms don't. Yeah. So then I just use the L instead. But the reason for the / is, one, I thought it kind of looked cool, but two is there actually is already an artist who doesn't seem to be active anymore, but was kind of around the 90s, I think, according to Wikipedia, who was already called Conso. So I want to be a little bit different to that. And then the album itself is, I don't know if you're familiar with a band called, what I always thought they were called Sun O, but apparently it's just pronounced Sun. They're a doom metal drone kind of band, but it's spelt SNU, then bracket. It's like, I can't remember how many. But so apparently you don't say the bracket. Oh, actually, I think it's O and then brackets, but apparently you don't say the O and bracket part. You just say sun is how it's pronounced. Right. So the bracket thing was inspired by that.
I wonder if they have those same issues with either files or people finding them.
They're a pretty kind of obscure band, so I'm sure they lean into it. I can highly recommend, if you ever see them playing near you, worth checking out. I saw them recently, and it was the most insane show I've ever been to.
Nice.
It's two guys on guitar, but they're like, their whole vibe is that they're kind of like one of the loudest and heaviest bands like to ever exist, is sort of their vibe. They both come out on stage fully robed, like in kind of druid robes with their guitars, and just like tons of smoke, more amps than I've ever seen on a stage in my life, just stacks and stacks of amps. And then, no exaggeration, the loudest thing I've ever experienced in my life, just loud, heavy, drony, kind of almost like a physical psychedelic experience because it's so loud that you just sort of feel the physicality of the sound. I went to the show with a friend, and we kind of both walked out of the show afterwards, and like we were like, what did we just experience?
Yeah,
what was this crazy thing? So can highly recommend it. It was
cool.
Very good.
We'll look them up, put them in the show notes. No drummer, or just two guitars?
Just two guitars. It's kind of, if you can sort of imagine what you think drone, if you've never listened to drone music and you imagine what does drone music sound like, they're kind of very typical of that. It's just sort of long single notes that kind of drone on for 5 minutes, but slowly kind of modulating in tone, and very, very heavy, lots of distortion. Very cool if you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah. Hey, something different, you know?
Yeah.
Be worth checking out.
Yeah.
Nice. So your record, which is great, by the way, I really enjoyed it. And
thank you very much.
Something we should point out to people too is that they can download the Ableton Live sets with it, which is a really nice touch. So they can see behind the curtain what you're doing.
Yeah. So that's something I've kind of always wanted to do, and for one reason or another just haven't gotten around to it, because as I kind of discovered doing this one was that it's quite a lot of work to put together, mostly because just I guess with the way that I've worked, and I think is probably pretty common in electronic music, there are various bits of things that have gone into the music, whether that be like samples I've used, Max for Live devices I've used, that I don't have the licenses. I have the licenses to obviously use them in the music, but not to distribute. Yeah. So what that meant is then I had to go through every Ableton project and either remove those and replace them with something alternative, or just like freeze and flatten the track. So it was more like a kind of a stem. So that was quite a long process to sort of go through and just make sure I wasn't kind of distributing any content I didn't have the rights to distribute. And then packaging them into a Ableton Live pack, collecting all the samples, lots of little kind of admin work that was required. But I think it was worth it in the end. I'm really glad I did it, because it's cool to be able to share that with people. And I've had lots of good responses from people saying, oh, it's really interesting to see how you put that together, or it's really interesting to see that, because I'm quite a minimalist sort of producer, to see that like, oh, you don't need to use hundreds and hundreds of tracks to get certain sounds. So I think it was a worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah, that was something that struck me right away, was it's not that many tracks, as many as I would have expected. And then I was also noticing how neat everything was. So I was wondering if maybe you sort of cleaned your room a little bit before you invited people over to see what's going on in there. Or is that just how you like to work?
That's just kind of how I work. I'm maybe overly so, tend to be pretty kind of tidy. And I think there's definitely a degree of keeping things organized from a workflow point of view, to be able to find things quickly. So a lot of the other music that I've worked on over the years has always been collaborative. And so I know from my experience of working with other music producers how just messy things can be. Yeah. And if I receive a project file from a collaborator and there's like track 2 and track 43, I'm like, well, what are any of these? So my first step is to always go through and just like label the tracks. Okay, that's a bass. This is a synth. So when I'm working on the session, I can kind of find that. And so when I'm working by myself, usually there's like a period of just kind of free creativity where I'm writing. I'm not worrying about keeping things organized. And then there's like a little bit after my sort of creative session where it's like, okay, cool, let's go in and just kind of tidy this up a bit. So the next time I come back to the session, I sort of know where everything is. And then over the years, I've also kind of just developed a particular color scheme for things that just like at a glance, I can see where certain things are. So like kind of shades of brown is always drums and percussion. Blue is always bass. There's all sorts of different things. And so that genuinely from like a workflow perspective, I find incredibly useful and definitely recommend to people, because it saves a lot of time digging around for things. But then there's probably like another level of maybe too much organization that I go into just kind of for my own personal sort of OCD-ness. But so the way the sessions look is generally how my sessions do end up looking when I'm done with them.
Well, that's good. And you make a great point. Like, you have to know what's going on. And even when it's your own stuff, you think you're going to remember that, track 7 is like that weird percussion thing you did. But by the time you get a few hours or days down the road, it's really easy to be like, what was that again? And especially if you're going to open it up at a later date, you're just not going to remember that stuff. So having that as part of your workflow is a smart idea.
Yeah, the other thing that I do that I find quite useful is track order, which I've had for years and years, is I'll generally always have like drum and percussion stuff at the bottom of all my tracks. I kind of almost think of it like in a frequency spectrum way. So sort of drums kind of sit at the bass, then I'll have bass above that, then kind of pads and paddy synths, lead stuff, vocals is kind of at the top of the track stack. Because I mix all my own stuff. So when I get to mixing, that also then makes it really easy to just quickly get to things and know where things are sitting in the mix as I'm kind of working. So it all sort of feeds into like a workflow kind of thing.
I do almost the same thing, except I start with the drums on the left or at the top, depending on which view you're looking at. And then it kind of works its way up, even though it's going down. Your way probably makes more sense. But I just got used to always having my drums on the left, like the first thing is there. And I don't have the colors though. Within a project, I'll usually color everything to make sense. But I don't know why I never decided like drums are red or anything like that, just so I always know. Seems like something I should have been doing forever now.
Yeah, I think it does help because it's one of those things that, like, even more so than a track name, it's quicker to just see. Like the color stands out a lot quicker than the actual name of the track at a glance. So again, can definitely recommend it.
That stuff really does help though, because when you're trying to be in the zone, like, it's the most fragile mindset there is, I think, where everything can pull you out at a moment's notice. So if you're trying, what happened to that track? Where is it? What is this one? Like, then suddenly you're not in it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I was also very surprised and impressed by your discipline with like your levels. I feel like every time I work on something, no matter what, I'm trying to always be mindful of headroom, right? But inevitably, you just wind up cranking things because louder always sounds more fun. But your mixes with nothing on the master bus on the tracks I looked at had so much headroom. You only going like halfway up the master meter and then all of that room. Tell me about that. How do you make that happen?
So the first thing I guess to add to that is the one thing that is missing from all those projects is the actual masters, because that I did separately. So everything kind of gets mixed down and then bounced out of Ableton, and I mastered that externally. So that was the one thing that was missing from those projects. But in terms of the kind of level or sort of gain staging of things, I think it's less of a thing people need to really be concerned about these days, because like modern DAWs have so much headroom anyway. I'm sure you're probably aware, but maybe if people listening on to where you can actually, and I probably shouldn't tell people this because they'll abuse it, but inside of Ableton, the only time you'll ever actually clip anything is on your master output. So you can have like all your tracks, even your devices, like on your master chain, just in the red on all those little meters in between the devices, and nothing will actually clip. You can just have a single utility at the end of your master chain that turns the whole volume back down, and you're good to go. Obviously, for certain things like a distortion, if you drive a distortion, it's going to distort more. So certain like level dependent effects, it's going to make a difference. So there's not like really any actual practical need these days to do that. But I guess I kind of got my start making music because I studied sound engineering and we worked on a lot of like analog consoles. It was kind of, even when I was studying, we used like digital hard drive recorders. So it's like kind of this sort of interesting transition point between digital and analog.
I played with those for a little while.
Yeah, they're kind of the worst of both worlds, because
I had the Alesis HD24.
Yeah,
which,
exactly. I
loved
those
at the time, but yeah. Ooh, yeah, the editing is crazy. I used to. So you only had like a digital clock, like an alarm clock, really, and you could do copy, paste, cuts, and things, punches and stuff. So sometimes I would figure out like, well, how many seconds is my song if it's at 120 BPM or something? What's 4 bars? And I have these notebooks filled with calculations. I always had like a calculator with me, but at the time. It was like, I made a loop out of this drum part and fixed that part that I messed up on. And it was amazing. Yeah. But it was also just so tedious. And when I saw my friends using Pro Tools, I was like, oh, there's a grid. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, I definitely don't miss those days too much. But so I kind of almost have a bit of an old school, what you'd call an old school approach to mixing, where I generally sort of always try and keep a bunch of headroom. Also, on an actual practical note, what I find, at least when I'm mixing, is I always generally set the volume faders on my tracks to somewhere between like -12 and -6. Not so much for headroom, but more for actual like headroom on the fader itself. Because if I'm mixing and I'm something like, oh, I want the drums to be a bit louder, but actually now the drums are at like +60 dB on the mixer, then I've got to like turn everything else down and then turn the drums up. So more from that point of view is I always just like to leave myself room on the actual fader itself to be able to turn it up if I need to. But again, like I could really probably just stick a utility on it and turn it up and get the same sort of thing. But just for this sort of style of mixing that I have, I find that quite useful.
Well, also for the minimal approach you have, because that's exactly what I wind up doing. If I need more than +6, the utility comes out, or maybe even something with a little color, some kind of distortion or compressor or something. But that's probably the smarter way, is to just start, lower. I've found when I do that stuff, I get further, without having to reach for plugins and stuff. With my band's record, I made it a point I mixed in mono first, wanted to try that for real, and also paid a lot of attention to the headroom stuff, and I managed to get it sounding pretty good. And then when I started doing the stuff I would normally be doing along the way, it was like, oh wow, and then you turn off mono and you can move things around, and you're like, man, this is like, now I can really do this, not out of necessity, but out of like choice. I want to spread things out, not because like I can't hear this unless I move it over there.
Yeah, exactly. That I've definitely done that before as well, the kind of mixing in mono thing, and then suddenly even to the point where like I'll do kind of almost imagined panning. I'll say like, oh, you can't hear it when you're panning in mono, but kind of think, oh, where do I want this to sit? And then you get to the end and you turn off your mono switch, and it's like, whoa, your whole mix just sounds. So maybe it doesn't sound better, but maybe other people who listen to it think, oh, they don't notice the difference, but because you've got it relative to the mono version.
I guess you're like going through when you're doing it the way I tend to do it, which is just kind of mixing as you go. You're always trying to make everything sound great right away. Yeah. And I guess that can be inspiring and fun, but when you save it for the end, you get all of that at once, and it's like, oh, whoa, here we go.
Yeah, I do.
It's discipline, I guess.
Yeah, because I know I also do the kind of mix as you go thing, but often, and I think I did for a number of tracks on the album, is kind of go back and not everything, but like reset a lot of things, reset levels, reset pans, and then go in and do like you would kind of do an old school mix where you've just got all these sort of channels that are all at unity gain, and then play around with it from there. And it just gives you like a nice fresh perspective on, because you've been listening to the mix in a particular way up until that point, and then you just suddenly kind of get to hear it in a fresh way and try new things, even try panning things in different places, have something more or less loud. And yeah, it just gives you a different perspective on something that you've probably been listening to for several hundred hours by that point.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I've run into the trap where I try to make everything sound like full. Like I'm mixing the drums and I want it's to take up everything and be in a really exciting sounding drum kit. And it's like, well, now you have no room for anything else. Then I got to change things to like bring in the bass. And then I want that to sound like really cool, at every stage. And you wind up having to dial it back. But sometimes all that work you did trying to get everything to sound cool and full and loud or whatever, like it becomes really daunting to undo all of that. Because I got like 7 different effects on each one of these drums. Like I can't delete that. It's going to totally change everything. So it almost gets you stuck in these like predicaments where you have nowhere to go.
Yeah. I mean, the beautiful thing about working in a digital environment is you can just do a save as, which I always do before I do the kind of mix reset. So I know I can go back. If I'm like, actually, I think I kind of preferred it before, I can go back. But then the interesting thing about that is a lot of the time I'll go back and say, no, I've done a good job. I think it sounds better where I've ended up now than where it was before, kind of thing. So always make sure to do the save as thing. And of course, the beautiful thing with Ableton specifically, I'm sure you can probably do this in other DAWs, but if you've got different versions of a project, you can open it up and drag in individual tracks or even individual device chains from old projects. So I know I've done that a couple of times where I'm like, I'm pretty sure I preferred how I had effects on the drums in my previous version. Well, I'll just go back and just grab that track and drag it in, and there it is.
Yeah.
So you can kind of almost have the best of both worlds nowadays because it's also flexible.
Yeah, I did that to have continuity too. Because we recorded all our drums at the same time pretty much, and then we kind of did everything one at a time. So if I had a sound I liked on a track, that tended to be what I used throughout because it was already there and I wanted the songs to sound the same, not be so drastically different. And plus, it's a lot faster. You actually finish things that way.
I think also to a degree, though, there's like a difference. And I always like to think about what's the difference between a creative effect and a mix effect. Because like an EQ is a good example of one that could be both, because you could use an EQ to really tonally alter a sound in a way that is creative versus just fitting it in with a mix. Whereas something like a distortion is probably more of a creative effect, and like that's when you're writing, you're adding that and you're really dialing in your tone. So usually like when I'm going through and like kind of leveling everything out to do a mix, most of the creative effects I'll try and sort of discern like what's a creative effect, what's actually an inherent part of the sound here, leave those on, and then things like EQs, compressors, kind of remove all those and then kind of come back and do a mix. So
yeah. Right. That's a good way to think about it too. And EQ is a good example. And a lot of times I'll have more than one EQ, maybe one in the beginning and then one a little later, just for that reason. Because first one is to like get the garbage out, the stuff I don't need. And then after whatever fun I've had in between, sometimes you need to tame it a little and then
fit it in
play around again. Yeah. You were very conservative from what I saw in your device use. You seemed like it wasn't these long chains that you could scroll through. It was tidy, very deliberate. And I think your record as a whole, it has a lot of clarity and it sounds, unified, but everything has its own place. Everything really is identifiable. I really enjoyed what you were doing with shakers. It's like a kind of a weird thing to bring up as like a feature, but you seemed like you have like a bunch of different kinds of shaker sounds, and they're really helping a lot with rhythm and texture, especially texturally, I guess is what I'm talking about. Like I really enjoyed the way you did that. Like there were a lot of times when the shakers came and it's just like, and then they just filled things in nicely.
I'm really glad that you picked up on that, because that is very much the intention. So it's glad to hear that it's working. It's always nice when you kind of are working on a piece of music and you have a particular intention, and you never know whether it's going to translate to sort of how people hear it. But I'm really glad that you picked up on the shakers, because that was quite a big sort of part of. At some point, I've kind of definitely defined, because I'm a drummer is my background, which I'm sure we've discussed before. I tend to sort of lean pretty heavily on percussion and rhythm as the kind of main guiding elements of a lot of what the music that I make. And so particularly like shakers and tambourines are just, I don't think I've ever made a track that doesn't have a shaker or a tambourine somewhere in there. Because I just find them so useful for adding groove to things, because I think it's they kind of almost, depending on how you use them, become this little consistent kind of rhythm that then the other drums kind of feed off and bounce off to create a particular groove. But then, as you said, like also just functioning as a kind of a textural element that can fill out the mix in those sort of higher areas. I particularly love tambourines. I don't know why. I just really like the sound of a good tambourine. Just kind of, there's something about like the way a tambourine works and the way a tambourine gets played that it's got, because if anyone's, I'm sure everyone's sort of familiar and seen tambourines being played, they obviously have that natural back and forth motion, which is kind of, you kind of can't not swing a tambourine. You got to like really try hard to not swing a tambourine. So it just always adds a good like amount of groove. I mean, shakers as well. You got that sort of back and forth shaker motion. It's really not hard. It's really hard to not groove with a shaker or a tambourine.
Yeah, they do. They help kind of, elasticize. It's not a word, is it? But like kind of like
They add that sort of push and pull.
Yeah, the push and pull
you need for a groove. Yeah,
rubber bandness of the groove.
Yeah, I know.
They're
exactly
hard to play too. They're really hard to play. I think as like a drummer, percussion person.
It is one of those things that I do often find when like I've done. Well, I discovered it for myself being a drummer. The first time I ever like played, quote unquote, played percussion in a band as opposed to drums, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm a drummer. And then I sat down. I was like, oh, wait, this is different to drumming. There's something very different going on here. And I kind of gained this admiration for percussionists. You always just sort of saw them as these kind of lesser drummers, but actually it's a whole different thing. And then you see it as well when like I'm at a gig, if I'm playing a tambourine and somebody's like, oh, I'll just come play the tambourine, it's pretty easy. And then they come up on stage and then they're like, oh, wow, this is not as easy as I thought it was.
Yeah. Especially because the tambourine, I've joked with like friends while we're recording, like you don't even have to hit the record button and it still makes it on the track because it just cuts through everything.
Oh, yeah. I always joke that the tambourine is the loudest thing known to man.
Yeah, like you just hear it from the stage, like without any kind of microphone.
Oh yeah,
I have some recordings of an old band playing, and somebody like was passing around tambourines in the audience or whatever, and it just ruined it.
Oh no!
It's like they're so loud, and then they're hard to play. It's not like the people think like because they're like school toy instruments almost. But like if you're wrong, like it can ruin everything.
I mean, I think it goes again. Like I now have the utmost respect for percussionists. I think all percussion instruments, people sort of think like even something like a conga drum, you just sort of see, oh, it's two hands. You just kind of hit this thing, but there's a whole technique to like how you use your fingers and the rhythm of it and where you play on the drum. That has a whole kind of other level to it.
Yeah, and even just how much it hurts after a while. Like you need to like really toughen your hands up for that.
Well, I played just a couple weeks ago. I was a family's 70th birthday, and I kind of got requisitioned to be in the band, but there was no drum kit available, so I was put on the cajon. And I mean,
that's the one you sit on.
Yeah, right? You sit on and you kind of drum with your hands. Again, another example of a percussion instrument that looks really easy to play, but is actually quite complex.
Yeah, it's just a box.
Yeah,
you just hit a box.
But I mean, you hit that with the palm of your hands, and unfortunately, we were in like a small room, and all the electric instruments, which don't have to worry about feedback or anything, were cranked really loud. But cajon, because it's mic'd, you obviously got to worry about feedback. So I could only turn it up so loud, and I had my brother out in the audience kind of saying, oh, this needs to go up, this needs to go down. And they were like, we can't hear the cajon at all. And I was like, it's feeding back. I can only play louder. My hands were like sore for about a week after that gig because I was just hitting this cajon so hard.
I believe it. I've jumped on the congas for like a track and my hands are like pink, look like I have sunburn or something on my palms. It's A lot of respect to percussionists, and they add so much
100%.
groove when they're good.
Yeah. But so circling all the way back to the tambourines and shakers, pretty much all of the percussion on the album, I'd wanted to, when I was working on the album, wanted to re-record it at some point, but actually they just all ended up being samples. So I never got around to kind of recording it live, but a lot of them are like samples that I recorded myself. I have a pack that I put out, I think it's one of my oldest packs, called Shake, which is just like a bunch of tambourine and shaker loops. So there's a bunch of those in there.
Is that nice when you do yourself that favor and you go, oh, cool.
Yeah.
I love that when I call up an old thing and I'm like, yes, it works.
Yeah, that pack's been 70 for years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always want to try and record like percussion stuff live if I can, but just kind of never got around to it for this album. So, but they kind of worked as they were, I think.
Yeah, they add a lot of groove to everything. You know, it's like electronic music, but it has a lot of organic vibe to it, which I think is a really hard thing to pull off. Even when I'm playing my guitar, say, over something that has electronic elements, I find the blending very challenging because for a whole variety of reasons, like the timing is never quite perfect, the tuning is never quite perfect. So,
but there's something really nice about that. Never quite perfect, though. And I think I know with a lot of my own music, I'm kind of, with all the electronic elements, I'm sort of always chasing that never quite perfect. I'm always adding a bit of detuning somewhere to the synths, or doing something to the sort of rhythmic parts, or playing them in by hand, or something that it's not quite perfect, that I think hopefully adds that sort of organic sound that you mentioned. Or like using field recordings as rhythmic parts that are going to just have an inherent rhythm to them that's not going to be quite perfect. And so sonically also this kind of organic elements, but then also musically in terms of the rhythm and the tuning of things, it feels a bit more natural. And I think it's one of those things that I mean, I know for myself, even having made it, when I listen back to it, I don't hear that everything's not out of tune, but like kind of slightly off a little bit. But you just kind of feel it more than anything, I think, is the idea. And I think it adds, or I hope it adds something to the music.
Definitely, because everything can be so perfectly in tune and quantized and everything. And it's just not natural. So injecting that in. And for me, if I'm playing guitar, I find it much better to try to ruin the rest of the music, but not ruin, but imperfect it, deperfectize it. I need to read a dictionary or something. But to just bring it down and to earth a little bit so that it fits with those other instruments, rather than trying to fix the guitars or trying to fix the other stuff to, meet the perfection of the digital stuff.
Yeah. They need an unquantized button in, humanize, I guess, is the the feature.
Humanize in Live 12 that's like my favorite knob.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so helpful. I used to do it with grooves. I used to use the random slider and grooves and put those on clips, but now Humanize is just great.
Oh yeah. And now in 12.1, we've got permanent grooves as well. Well, not permanent grooves, but like, I don't know how much digging you've done into what's new in Live 12.1, but the default groove thing is quite cool.
I haven't played with that because my default set didn't have a groove, so it's not in there. So I don't have it. So I need to maybe just get rid of that and then just see how that works a little more, that it applies it. But yeah, it's interesting because that global groove knob, I almost had no use for that ever, really. You were just
using the groove on individual grooves themselves.
Yeah, right. And then if I was putting that groove on a few different elements, that little slider affected it all. But the only time I ever used the global groove was for the arpeggiator.
Exactly.
Because strangely, the arpeggiator swing mode is either like full kind of triplet, but if you dial down that global, then it starts going back to being straight. When you get to 0, then the swing is straight.
Yeah.
now it seems to have much more purpose.
Yeah, I kind of my journey with Groove was I always started with grooves the way you do, where it was like individual, dialing in the kind of amount on individual grooves and never touching the global groove until that point when I discovered the arpeggiator swing and that it links to the global groove. And then I kind of made a concerted effort at that point where I was like, actually, just even if I'm not using the arpeggiator in a set, just using the global groove to adjust how much groove, just with the potential of like, oh, well, maybe I'll add an arpeggiator and then I don't have to like kind of go back. And now I've kind of switched my workflow around that I do use the global groove. So if I do end up using an arpeggiator and want to swing it a bit, it kind of locks in with everything else. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a little workflow switch that now is going to be even more useful with the default grooves.
Yeah, that's cool because you kind of had to do one or the other in the past. Because when you bring down the global groove, then it brings down all those grooves. But the arpeggiator sort of meets it there.
Yeah.
I would never really do them both at the same time. It was kind of one or the other for that reason. But now, maybe. But there's some Max for Live arpeggiators that have a groove. Like you'd expect it to swing
dial, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with 12.1, especially on push. Like the standalone push that you can get your macro variations. I mean, that was just a killer for me that you couldn't get them. So I got so into it, with Live 11, just making like a single rack that I can have like all of these sounds in. And then it was like, oh, I don't have it anymore. It was so disappointing. But
yeah, for me, the big one is the macro randomization because I use that all the time for creative stuff. So being able to do that from push now is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the way the auto shift works, the auto tune inside of Live. I think sometimes things, I guess like certain features that people have wanted for a long time took a long time to get to Live. People are like, why is this taking so long? Like comping was a good example, take lanes. But the way they did it was great. And I think the same thing with this auto-tune device is it's fun, it's playable. You can put MIDI into it. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's a super fun device. I mean, I used to use, and I'm sure a lot of other people have used the little Alter Boy effect by Sound Toys for doing like, because a lot of the music that I make ends up having like vocal samples in it. And there's this one sort of technique that I like to use. If you've got like let's say you've got like a chopped up vocal loop that's maybe a bar or 2 bars long, it can very quickly get kind of boring tonally. So what I always used to do is just chuck a little Alter Boy on there and then automate the 4-man control just to move kind of slowly up and down. So it just shifts it sort of very subtly tonally, but it kind of adds some variation. And I'm always looking for ways to get rid of plugins and use more native devices. So sorry, Sound Toys, but not going to be using little Alter Boy anymore because you can do that in Auto Shift now, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I used to do the same thing with Nectar by Isotope. But they used to have a mixing and I forget what it's called, mixing and maybe live or something like that mode where kind of like Auto Shift has the live button. So like there's no latency. So I could use it live. And I always loved dropping the form. It's what sounded like this when I was saying, you got that like kind of deep voice thing.
Oh yeah.
But after Nectar 2, I couldn't really do it anymore. Kind of like lost that effect live at least.
Yeah.
But now it's back and you could like have a lot of fun with that. Like you said, automating LFOs on it or maybe like using the envelope follower to change it based on, I mean, I haven't even tried this stuff, but it's like,
there's lots of fun creative potential.
Yeah. It kind of feels like this release is maybe what they wanted 12 to be, if I had to guess.
Yeah, like, I've seen that comment on all the videos and on Reddit, and everyone's like, "Oh, this is what 12 should have been." And I think everyone kind of sort of knows that this is kind of what they wanted to have in 12, but maybe it just wasn't all ready in time.
Yeah, maybe.
So
it's kind of nice to digest some of the other stuff first, though. To get used to, like, the MIDI tools and the scale awareness stuff And then, okay, now
there was already so much stuff in 12.
Yeah.
Like even if this hadn't come out for a while, there was enough in 12 that it felt like a substantial update. Well, I felt that way. I know there were a lot of people that thought, oh, okay, maybe it's a bit lacking in terms of a major update. But that definitely has been something I've seen a lot in all the comments, is everyone who wasn't upgrading to 12 because they thought, oh, there's not enough. They're all like, oh, okay, cool. Now I'm going to upgrade. Because now there's just so much cool new stuff. So,
yeah, I think if you were a live user from like older versions, there was a lot to take in. The browser for me was the biggest hurdle. Still learning that a bit, but they seem to have made some nice changes that in the new version 12.1, I mean, especially just like grouping your plugins by manufacturer was the nightmare. I was like, oh man, I don't know where anything is anymore.
you definitely went alone in that.
Yeah, but now it's like, okay, I'm starting to see it. I got to see how that works on push, but
yeah, the auto tagging samples is a really big one for me, because I kind of was using a lot of the features in the new browser, but just hadn't sat down to like put in the time to go in and tag all my own samples. I'm like, oh, am I really going to do this? And just haven't gotten around to it. But now with the auto tag, it's so far in the sort of testing in 12.1, it's been pretty good. The samples that are auto tagged as kick drums are all kick drums, and it's working pretty well, which is really cool.
Yeah, I had a to-do list. And I keep always a to-do list. And one of the items was like tag devices and samples. And every time I look at that, I was like, I don't want to do that.
Oh, I'm sure you're really glad you procrastinated on it now.
I'm so glad I didn't, because that would have been quite a project. But now it's kind of there for you, which is very helpful.
Oh, yeah.
So I know we're approaching the end of our time here. But we were kind of saying earlier, this is like a period of reevaluation. This is before we started talking, I think, or recording. What's that looking like for you? I mean, because you've been very active over the years, constantly creating stuff. If people recognize your voice from Ableton official videos and tutorials, that's because it's you. And you've definitely kept very active. What are you thinking about these days as far as moving forward?
Gosh, so I mean, let's skip back an hour and start with that question, because I could talk about that for an hour. There's a lot of stuff that I've been kind of thinking about recently in terms of the sort of music tech space, and just kind of I think that the world in general is in an interesting place, technology wise, and I've been feeling a lot, kind of probably for a number of years, just personally, like there's kind of enough stuff in the music tech world, at least. There's obviously some very interesting stuff happening with AI tools at the moment, which, I mean, people have pretty strong opinions about those. But there's been sort of AI-based tools in music for a while, but there's a lot of kind of new stuff coming out, which I think has got lots of interesting creative potential. But beyond that, it's like, well, here's another compressor, and here's another delay effect that does X, Y, Z. And so as somebody who makes tools, that's been quite a challenge for me recently, because I've been thinking about like, what is missing? Well, I don't feel like I need to kind of make anything new, because it all kind of exists already, and all the ideas have been done. But that sort of leads me down to the path to things like the Essentials pack, where it's like, okay, well, these things exist, but how can I kind of make them better or improve their workflow or think about them in a different kind of more creative way, which is its own sort of challenge. So that's something I've been very much sort of thinking about a lot recently, is what sort of tools and things can I make, or do I need, that are going to take the things that already exist, and the sounds and tools that already exist, but maybe refine them in different and interesting ways. And there's a bit of a sort of a head shift going on there. But also in terms of just like content that's out there, as someone who's creating content for YouTube, and I've sort of always historically been quite slow at putting out videos. I think the most productive I've ever been is maybe like 5 or 6 videos in a year kind of thing. and probably on average more like 1 or 2. But now sort of thinking about the kinds of content that I want to make and kinds of tutorials and things I want to make is you can go on YouTube and you can find a video about absolutely everything. I mean, just talking about Live 12.1, a couple days after it was out, there were 20, 30 different videos about everything that's new in 12.1. And so I'm thinking a lot recently about how can these things, what can I do to kind of contribute to all this without just adding more noise? And that's still like a very much a kind of a journey in progress and that I'm figuring out. But there's going to be, I think there'll be a lot of shifts kind of for me in the next couple months of how I approach content and the kind of content I put out, and haven't quite landed on exactly what that'll be yet. But yeah, it's all kind of mulling over at the moment. It's in a sort of mind stew.
Yeah, it's a good point, because you're right. There's no shortage of this, like devices, compressors, EQs, and all that. There's no shortage of kind of like news reporting on what's going on in the world of music technology. And I agree with you. Like the essentials thing is kind of nice. It's fun to have something that just gets to the point, to streamline the workflow. I've been enjoying that kind of stuff a lot. Stuff that just gets me to being creative faster. Yeah,
well, that's also the other thing that, and I think the album was very much a part of that, is I got into this because I want to make music. And I think all of us who are in this space, we want to make music, but it's quite easy, specifically like when you are working in music tech or teaching things, it's very easy to get distracted by the technology itself, and the technology becomes the focus, which I think is important in many ways because the sort of technology enables us. But I want to try and focus a lot more on the music, and what is going to help me make more music, finish more music, me and the sort of people that I work with, and how is the stuff that I create going to actively help people make more music instead of sit around tweaking knobs and making lots of weird and wonderful sounds, but never actually kind of finishing anything or making any music. So both for me personally, I want to spend a lot more time actually making music and then trying to help other people make more music as opposed to just buying more plugins and never doing anything with them. So.
Sometimes I feel like I should change like my bios to like talk about making music. I talk about making music. Somebody commented on one of my videos like last week or something like, "You talk too much. How about you make some music?" And I was like, I know. That's the hard part though.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like being a carpenter and just like checking out hammers all day. Like, oh, look at this hammer. It's weighted differently and it's got gold plating or something.
I mean, there is something really cool about that. Like, I also, as much as I got into this to make music, I also love the technology side of things. And I'm really interested in different tools. I mean, like talking about something like auto shift, it's nothing new. Auto tune's been around for ages. All those things have really existed. But having it as a little device inside of Ableton is really, really, I'm super excited about it. It's going to be a fun kind of device, and the sort of aesthetic of things as well also helps you be creative in different ways. And so like from the device side, thinking about that kind of stuff, and trying to sort of strike a balance between being really interested in the technology and being passionate about the technology, but not letting it kind of consume the music side, is the balance to try and find. So, because they both have because a gold-plated hammer sounds pretty cool as a carpenter. Yeah. That sounds like a pretty fun thing to have. But
to build houses with, though,
Exactly.
Like it's the same thing. Like, I'm excited about these new features and stuff because it makes me think about what I can make with it. But since every single day there's something else coming out, you can get caught up in the like, oh, and wow, I could do with that thing, and oh, and if I had that, like you can just. So I've been trying to reduce my incoming stream, like of like stuff I follow, and just so like I'm not constantly just my music time isn't finding out what new things I can make music with are. And like, I don't need to know every single new release. I don't need to know that there's a new plugin or there's a new synth or I like to know that stuff, but sometimes you can just the consumption part becomes the whole thing after a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Make some music.
make more music. Oh yeah.
Well, you just did an album, so that's pretty awesome. Congrats on that.
I've been trying to do that for a long time, and finally motivated myself to get it done. Yeah. So I think part of that to sort of neatly tie everything into a little bow. I think what ended up really kind of working for me for the album was, after many years of trying, is kind of finally striking that balance that I was talking about between the technology and the creativity. There was a point before I started the album where I sort of sat down and I went through all the tools that I had, all the plugins I had, all the devices in Ableton, sample packs. Like literally, it was like a period of about 2 months where I didn't make any music. I just went through everything that I had and said, do I need this? No. Uninstall that plugin, delete that sample pack. I need this. Cool. I'm going to keep that. So at the end of that 2-month period, when I sat down, I was like, now I'm going to make music. I'm not sitting down and saying, well, I've got 5 million kick drums. Which kick drum am I going to use? It's like, no, I've got 5 kick drums. I know which kick drum I'm going to use because one of these 5, or shake a sample or instrument or synth or whatever it was. And that was really useful to actually just being able to finish stuff. And there were points where, like, I was working on the album, I was like, oh, if I just used like XYZ synth, I could maybe get this sound. And it had to be sort of quite intentional of like stopping myself and saying, no, this is what I set out with, and I'm going to stick to this. And ending up maybe, I think what can be quite easy when you have all these tools available to you is you think, oh, I'm just going to use this like synth and load up a preset and make a sound. And you get something that's kind of interesting, versus what happened with the album is my synth of choice was a wavetable, Ableton's wavetable. And so by using that, it's like, well, maybe I've got the sound in my head that I could load up a particular synth and create it with, but actually, how can I make this with wavetable? Make something similar. And I mean, wavetable is not the greatest example because it's a pretty diverse synth. You can create a lot with it, but just that like little limitation helped sort of focus everything. And also then kind of quieted that noise of, oh, well, I need this synth or I need this effect to be able to finish stuff. It's like, well, no, I don't. I've got it all here. And I decided that already before I started. I knew that this was all I needed. And so I know that's what I'm going to stick to. And then the Essentials pack kind of ties into that, because in this process of going through and selecting all the bits that I wanted to work with, there were a couple little gaps of things that I thought, I haven't quite found, in all these tools I've been through, I haven't quite found the thing that does exactly that. And so the Essentials kind of came about by filling in those gaps of like, oh, I just really wanted a simple drum tuning device and outcomes shifter kind of thing. But yeah, that sort of process of being really deliberate and enjoying the technology, going and spending time with it, like I think I spent probably a week where every day, actually it was probably more than a week, probably a full month, where every day I was like, today is the distortion day. I'm going to learn everything I can about distortion. I'm going to read up on tubes. I'm going to read up on tape. I'm going to read up on whatever and go really deep on distortion, instead of like spending a bunch of time with a whole bunch of different plugins and not really kind of grasping the depth of them there. There's also that sort of bit of going deeper with things. That then sort of enabled all the creativity.
Right. It's a great idea. I fantasize about that sometimes, of going and deleting things, but I wonder if maybe someone will just have to throw my computer in in the ocean. I'll have to just start fresh on a new computer, you know?
My computer actually died 2 weeks ago. Something happened and my hard drive must have gotten corrupted. Fortunately, I managed to get I was able to reformat the hard drive and get it back up, but everything was wiped. So I had backups of like important stuff, but I had to reinstall everything. And it was really nice because it's like, I kind of already knew what I wanted to keep because I'd done the process before, but I got to do a little reevaluation of like, actually what plugins am I going to install? What am I? So I can highly recommend getting your computer to crash. Just stomp on your hard drive or something. And
Right.
Start fresh.
Yeah. I guess if, I mean, that's like a worst nightmare type of thing, but if it happens, that's the silver lining, is that you can reconstruct. I have used the collections though. Sometimes I'll use one and I'll just tag things like for, say, like a project. It's like, all right, this is sort of my palette. And then I can just click on the collections and there are the drum sounds, there are the synths, there are the, and that helps. And it's without the commitment of saying goodbye to a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's smart
the real
limit
trick
yourself like that.
The real trick, I think, is the commitment, because even like you can always reinstall plugins. So once I've uninstalled everything, it's like, oh, but I could really use that synth. Install it. No, don't do that. And you got to just kind of, be really disciplined about sticking to the rules and things that you set for yourself in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's where our creativity lives, is in those limitations and finding solutions to those problems. I only got 5 kicks, so what are we gonna do? Maybe I'll put my Essentials distortion, that effect on there to get that extra growl instead of searching through the samples.
It makes you think in different ways when you have to work within those limitations. So
very good. I'm excited to see what you come up with and where this leads you, because I'm sure it'll be cool. And maybe I'll see that exciting Warble FX added to the Essentials.
It's definitely, I'm going to go on the list of to-dos. So.
Nice. So we should direct people to your main site, which is ELPHNT.io, but there is only one E and no A. So
there's this the classic name thing I do to myself, where I make it really hard to find.
Remove the vowels, essentially. So ELPHNT.io, and is console.co.
Yeah, so the actual word console,
L's.
just twice with actual L's. Unfortunately, console.co was taken, so I had to do it twice.
And you can't have those slashes in there in a web address.
That would not work for the URL. So,
yeah, I love the album. I had an especially nice experience listening to it last night. I was I wasn't going to sleep yet, but I was just wanted to recharge for a little bit and just put that on, and it took me into like another world.
Awesome.
And felt rejuvenated and continued the night. So
nice. Love to hear it.
I think it's great. It's a lot of cool stuff. Great production, of course. And if you want to check it out, people, you can download the sessions and see what's going on in there. And that's like a master class in itself right there, and just composition and seeing how things get done.
Yeah. The other side of that, just to add, by the way, is that part of putting out those sessions was so that people could dive in and see how they're made, but also so people can pull them apart and use them for their own music. So anyone
I saw that on your site. You've got some
downloads that is welcome to do what you want with it. Do a remix, use some of the loops, synth sounds, just pull stuff out of there. One of the fun things with Ableton is you can just go in and grab a synth preset and save it into your library and use it somewhere. So
yeah. That's a good idea. I'll probably be doing that myself.
Awesome.
So I have more choices.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I know. I know I'm a hypocrite. I talk about limitations and I'm like, I got a new pack, everybody. Oh, well. It's fun.
It is nice to have new stuff.
Yeah. So cool, man. Yeah. Tom, thanks so much. We'll send people to your sites in the show notes. Anything else before we wrap up?
Oh, don't think so. Nothing that comes to mind other than just thanks for having me. It's always fun to chat. And sorry, I've got to rush off because I'm sure we could probably keep chatting for another hour.
Yeah, well, we can always do it again.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure.
Cool. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.